Yeah, just to say that all of those listeners out there that love Alaskan bears, we really apologise for Steve laughing at that point, because I just think that was, possibly it could be taken the wrong way.
No, look, I was just more thinking, there's just so many places out, so many organisations in need. I wouldn't have, if I had a list, the organisations I'm going to sponsor or going to support, it's not that Alaskan Bears isn't worthwhile. It just wouldn't have come up on my list.
No, that's why I'm apologising, just in case you created the wrong impression. Right, so
when you grow up in New Zealand, and especially Wellington, it's invariably natural. It's like growing up in Canberra. You will end up in government in some time. So I literally just stumbled into it. Like, the government in Wellington is the biggest hirer. And I did a few gigs in a few different government departments.
Hello and welcome to the Help My Wealth podcast, Money Rules or Money Rules. Here at Help My Wealth, we are all about empowering financial success in our community of listeners. We hope you find today's topic both informative and helpful.
So, hey guys, welcome to our podcast, Help My Wealth, Money Rules or Money Rules. I'm Hamish Ferguson, and today we've got Steve Logan with me today. Thanks, Steve, for coming along.
Thank you, Hamish. Good to be here.
Yeah, no problems at all. So we've got a great guest today. His name's Jonathan Srikanthan, and he currently works for Atlassian. And if any of you have paid attention to Atlassian over possibly the last 10 to 15 years, they're probably the closest Australian version to what I would call Google, all right? So they have been very, entrepreneurial and have created a great space for technology and software in the Australian community. Jonathan has been with Atlassian, I believe it's almost 10 years now. Is that right, Jonathan? Yeah. Prior to that,
yeah, about to correct 10.
Yep. So, and prior to that, he was with Qantas for quite a significant length of time, and believe it or not, he was with the New Zealand government before that. So, one of the things I'm really looking forward today is finding out a little bit how this journey has come together. John's role with Atlassian is predominantly around philanthropic. You try and say that 3 times, and it's all about helping the resources of the company actually make a difference to the community. So, welcome, Jonathan. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Hamish. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for hosting.
No, all good. And have you had a good day? Has today been a day where you're sort of, glad to get to the end and just go, it's almost 1 o'clock or something, or how are you feeling?
I will let you know as soon as we finish this interview in terms of how my day's panned out. But no, seriously, it is. We're in the middle of sort of yearly plannings and performance reviews and stuff like that. We do 2 cycles, so it's nice to take your head out of that for now and sort of focus on something different.
Yeah, okay. And did I introduce you okay? Was that all right the way I described Atlassian, and am I going to get into trouble for that at all or not?
Yeah, I think comparing it to Google is probably more the other way around now in Australia.
Right.
So, yeah. But no, great intro. You know me well.
Yeah, cool. So, John, I also married with 2 children. We did get into a bit of strife before because we realised that their dog is classified as one of the kids. So that's just something to bring to attention now. And married to lovely Priya. How long have you been married for?
We have just clocked over 15 years.
Yeah, okay, great.
So, yeah.
So, John, if we can start off, just those 3 companies just don't really roll off the tongue very easily to me, going from the New Zealand government to Qantas and to Atlassian. So I guess, can you help us just for a little bit, just to unpack that journey from your perspective and how you ended up in each of those roles and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you grow up in New Zealand, and especially Wellington, it's invariably natural. It's like growing up in Canberra. You will end up in government in some time. So I literally just stumbled into it. Like, the government in Wellington is the biggest hirer. And I did a few gigs in a few different government departments, Ministry of, Agriculture and Forestry, and then my last one was with the Department of Health, which gave me very, very different exposure to different things at a very strategic sort of policy type level. And then I had the opportunity to take a sabbatical and move to Australia, which I loved. And worked in a few smaller sort of roles, and then landed at Qantas in a HR capacity. And then an opportunity came up to work in their foundation, and so that sort of started my journey in the area that I guess it's broadly known as corporate social responsibility, which is essentially, and you described it well, Hamish, it is about sort of channeling the resources of the companies to make a difference in society and the areas where they work and so on like that. And so Qantas and Atlassian, same sort of journey there. Actually, interesting story. Both of those roles were mat leave covers. So I had a 9-month stint in Qantas, which in their foundation, which then turned into a permanent role, which then turned into running the foundation. And same with Atlassian. I still remember leaving Qantas. Can I share the story?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, yeah. I still remember my role actually got made redundant after 10 years or 8 years. And I was about to sign off, and I sit in this network of corporate foundation managers in Australia, and I just send them all a note saying, hey, I'm going to take 3 months off and kind of figure out what to do, and I'm going to get rid of the suit and wear T-shirts and board shorts. 5 minutes later, my phone rings, and it is the lady that was working at the Atlassian Foundation, and her opening pitch to me was, how would you like to wear T-shirts and board shorts for the rest of your life? and that sort of started, and she was going on mat leave as well. And so that was a 9-month cover that sort of now turned into nearly 10 years. Sorry, I digressed there, but just to answer your question, very different sectors and very different industries, from government through to Qantas, which is, steeped in history, very iconic, probably the most iconic brand in Australia, but very structured, very rigid, very different in how they do their their philanthropic work. Through to Atlassian, very innovative, still, 20 years later, it still feels like you're working in a startup, which is fantastic. So, very different.
Okay. And help the listeners and ourselves to an extent understand, because, when I think of philanthropic type work, obviously there's a lot of need out there. There's so much, there's never enough, So when you're working in an organisation like that, how do these organisations actually sort of work through that problem or that question? Can you answer that? Yeah.
Yeah. Look, it depends on the organisation itself. But what we notice is that the organisations that do it really well are those organisations that are the ones that are really tightly focused in what they do in the community. So. And so for us, at Atlassian, we're very tightly focused on a couple of things, and predominantly education is sort of where we make the biggest difference, and that's where we put a lot of our funding into. And in education, even within that space, we've really narrowed it down to skills of the future. How can we empower young kids, educate young kids in skills of the future? Because really, that's where technology is really disrupting the education space as well. So we really want to play in that space. There are a couple other things that Atlassian really focuses on is, we're really big on this whole Pledge 1% movement, because that's how literally the foundation got started. The two founders at the start of, their journey with Atlassian parked 1% of equity in a charitable trust. They weren't worth anything at that. I think they were in credit card debt or something, 10,000 credit card debt. Fast forward to now, it's a 50 billion or whatever the share price is, US $50 billion company, and that 1% is now worth significant amounts. So we're really trying to get that message out to other startups and other organizations. Look, start your philanthropy now, build it into your DNA, park some of that equity, give away, percentage of your profits, give away percentage of your employees' time and products and so on. Do it now so that when you're further down the journey, it's much easier. So they're the sort of the main things that we really like to, that we play in. And I think that's really, if you're an organizer, if you're a corporate and you've really honed down your area of giving and focus, I think you tend to do better. And it's like that even personally with us, right? Like we tend to have focus areas on what we are passionate about, whether it's a church or a theme that's very close to our heart because of, it might be cancer because we've had family members. But, when we double down on something, we tend to generally have more impact than you do spreading out wide. I hope that's answered your question.
I mean, look, just on that, is that a hard pitch with most companies to sort of say, hey, look, you really should be giving, 1%, 0.5%, 2%, 3, 10, whatever it is, at the beginning, even when you're not doing well. I would imagine it'd be a minority group that actually jump on board that and go, yeah, I get that. So the rest, it's a conversation. Do you find it an easy conversation, or I'm assuming it's not? But I'd love to know what your thoughts are.
I think it's been an easier conversation than what we've originally thought and expected. And I think it's because it's not just Atlassian. We've had other organizations that have done something similar. The best known is Salesforce, right? They're bigger and sort of more well-known than Atlassian. And they really pioneered the whole 1-1-1 model, which is 1% of equity, 1% of profit, 1% of employee time. And I think proof's in the pudding. Since we started this Pledge 1% movement, right, we've got over, I think the last count, about 15,000 organizations around the world. I think it's even more, probably closer to 20, that have actually taken that pledge to start giving back in some capacity. So I think it is easy to do, but it's easy to do at the early stage. When you're a ASX listed company, giving away 1% of your equity is just too hard. So you want to get them early on in that journey.
When you're making 20 grand compared to 20 million, it does change that amount of money, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But I think it's also about control, right? Yeah. When you are a privately owned company, you have that decision to do that. But all of a sudden, if you're listed, then all of a sudden you've got other state shareholders and so on like that. You've got a lot of fiduciary sort of duty. So it's about getting it in before you sort of experience that growth, which we hope, the companies that have taken the pledge do, because the more they do it and the more they grow, the more money we want to see back into the sector.
So with the 1% movement and that pledge that a company does, is that them, pledging that and then they decide where they're going to be putting their money, what they're going to be doing, or as a group, as a 1% movement group, have you sort of organised a structure where people actually can look and see where are some good places to put their money, or is it a very hands-off approach?
Absolutely, it's all at their discretion about what they want to do. Right, we've got an organisation here in Sydney that. They are passionate about saving the Alaskan bears, right? and their 1% of, I think it's profit at the moment, is going into, a fund there. I believe they send people over and their volunteering time to work with Alaskan bears. Wow. So it's really at the discretion of what they want. And that's the idea. It's just to set the infrastructure, set the mechanism, but then they choose where they give.
So can I just put in a little note there just to say that all of those listeners out there that love Alaskan bears, we really apologise for Steve laughing at that point, because I just think that was, possibly it could be taken the wrong way.
No, look, I was just more thinking, there's just so many places out, so many organisations in need. I wouldn't have, if I had a list, the organisations I'm going to sponsor or going to support, it's not that Alaskan Bears isn't worthwhile. It just wouldn't have come up on my list.
No, that's why I'm apologising, just in case you created the wrong impression. Right, so Johnny, just to encourage you as well, like as we're talking, it's funny, you talk about the story about you doing maternity reliefs, and, with what we're trying to achieve here at Help My Wealth is to break down these barriers, and career management is one of those things. So I wonder how many people have actually walked away from a job proposition or a job opportunity because it was a maternity relief, because they didn't feel like they were going to get that job security out of it, and not realise the potential and the opportunity that possibly can come off the back of that if they get in, they do a good job, they show what they're made of to an extent, and be able to build it from there. Would you agree with that?
I think so. I think I think the need to have financial security sometimes hamstrings, sometimes really hinders opportunities when they're faced to you. And I'm the greatest example of that, right? At the back of my mind, I'm always thinking about, the next role or the next opportunity, how's that going to support me and my family? So it's a very real fear, right? And I do think that is something that, you've got to give consideration to. But the trade-off is that sometimes you do give the horse in the mouth, like a real good opportunity. So it is finding the tension about sort of, minimizing that or sort of dealing with that sort of anxiety that you have around there to what it can open up. For me, the Atlassian one was easier to do. My role was already redundant, right? But for me, the choice was, and this is for me the funny thing was that at that time I was considering the Atlassian offer. I had another role with quite a big consulting company to do the same sort of thing, and it was a really well-known consulting company. And then on this other hand, there was this company that no one had ever heard of. I'd never heard of. My wife was like, "Look, they got swear words in their values. You really want to go after the startup sort of thing, right?" But for me, it was that whole thing about, well, do I really want to go into the known and the same old again, or have this opportunity to do something a bit more greenfield, start something from scratch and do that. And it helped when you could ditch the suit and wear,
it sounds like you were sold. As soon as you heard the word t-shirt and board shorts, you were in.
That was it, mate. That was it. Everything else is sort of
you were saying to your wife, I don't care what's in the perspective for this statement. Exactly. I'm getting board shorts and t-shirt for the next 9 months.
That's it.
It is interesting.
But I jest about the board shorts and t-shirt. But really, for me, the biggest conundrum there was, do I go after something that was well-known, a recognized brand, or do I go after something that is unknown, risky from a career perspective, right? And for me, it was, moving away from those fears that I had from a job perspective to take that risk. So, but I get it, Hamish. It is something that really hinders a lot of people.
So if I can talk about something else with Atlassian briefly. So one of the things that I've noticed, come up every now and then with jobs and that sort of thing, and it is interesting how what does social change look like? Because Atlassian, to my knowledge, was much earlier than COVID, was out there trying to almost deliberately hire people regional, right, and get away from that stereotyped Sydney, you've got to work, come to the office and that sort of thing. So you've probably walked alongside them with that for quite a length of time. So how have you found that journey, and what's your thoughts on it?
This is the transition to remote work and sort of how we're, I think pre-COVID, it's something that as a company we've always wanted to do, right? We have the tools. I mean, our tools are set up for remote work, remote collaboration, but there was still this, the company, for whatever reason, just didn't pull the trigger. And it was actually COVID that actually forced our hand to go remote, right? And so I don't think it was anything amazing that the company did. It was really forced on us. But I think what the company did was they embraced it, and they embraced it really, really strongly, to the point now we're one of the few tech companies where we haven't mandated anybody to go back, right? And so much of this is steeped in research, right? Like, we are surveyed on a regular basis about mental health, about productivity, about effectiveness, and so on like that. And so there's data showing that, people working from home, or people, it's actually, the debate is not about working from home, working in the office. It's about actually having choice, right? And so, post-COVID, what we're finding is that there's a demographic of employees that are actually preferring to come back into the office. It's usually your younger demographic who rely on being in the office for their social interaction, right? Whereas us older people who've got family and connections and stuff like that prefer not to. So it is really about the choice of where you work, as opposed to either or sort of thing. And so I guess the main thing is this decision's really paid off for us, and it's paid off in a number of ways. Productivity has actually increased. It hasn't just stayed flat; it's actually increased. There was another big one. My mind just skipped me. It was actually a big one. They actually released their 1,000-day remote working sort of findings on that. Sorry, it will come back to me.
No, that's okay.
I'll add it to it.
While you're thinking, I'd love to know, because I've talked a lot.
Sorry, that was it. Sorry, Stephen. That was it. Tech companies are in a massive war for talent, right? And so we were getting very restricted in terms of where we could hire, right? There were amazing candidates who were working in, rural, remote New South Wales or in outback Queensland. All of a sudden, we were accessing all these talent, right, that didn't want to move into a city, and we were accessing them. So all of a sudden, I think our recruitment jumped like 40% or something like that over that period, just because we relaxed up on our working from wherever. We call it Team Anywhere, which means you can work anywhere in the world, subject to there being an Atlassian entity in that place. But it's just opened up. We've got a guy who drives around America in a camper van, surfs, and codes during the day. That's his sort of lifestyle that he chooses, right? And it's about giving everybody that flexibility.
Well, let's face it, he surfs during the day and codes all night.
Sorry, say it again?
He surfs during the day and then probably codes all night.
Possibly, yeah.
So, look, I've talked to a few people about remote work, particularly post-COVID, where a lot of companies were forced into that, and then some have gone back and not. And the question that always comes up is culture. That there's been a bit of a culture shift now. Like, I was talking to one person who actually works in the military, and he was saying it's amazing how well the military, the army in particular, took on remote work for a lot of their officers. But he was saying, when he goes into the office now, in head office, there's not as many people there, and so the culture has sort of changed. It's not that the culture's bad, it's that it's different. You don't have all the people walking around, the conversations going on, sitting at lunch, doing extracurricular activities. Do you find that that's changed with Atlassian, or have you just evolved into something different?
Both, Stephen. So it has changed. There was a very vibrant culture in the office, right? And it's everything that's stereotyped, from free food to people bringing in their pets through to, like my kids would come in, once, twice a month, right? And to enjoy everything that's there. They would put on activities like you'd have a petting zoo in a high-rise building in Sydney just for the kids. Like, so there was all these really cool things that made it what it was from a benefit perspective, in addition to the benefits that you got from working next to each other, right? Like at the moment, me and my boss, we lament about not being able to just pop over and ask a question. You now have to sort of, ping someone on Slack and then, jump on a Zoom or something like that. So they all, we do lament that a little bit, but I think what's replaced it is, I think, equally as good, right? And it is those peripheral things which are very important to the individual that I think has become more of a value than the sort of the office related stuff. So, for example, you've got young people who are now able to, move away from Sydney, and I'm using Australia context here, move down to Wollongong, further down, Newcastle, and buy afford a property. You've got spouses who can start their career because the other spouse is now working from home and can manage kid drop-offs and things like that. So there's all that sort of thing. But I think for me the biggest that I miss is the social element. Extroverted sort of person. Not having that. Being able to interact with people regularly. So and I'm an example of someone who regularly schedules an office time with my team. So we go in once a fortnight and we just say, look, we are going to have lunch and we're just going to chill and hang out and do stuff. And that day we go into the office, no real work gets done. It's all relationship building and getting, hanging out and things like that. So that's the sort of trade-off. So to answer your question, I think it's evolved into a
different sort of culture, which I think still definitely works.
And
you're not saying the culture's worse. You're just saying you have to understand that what we had is to an extent no longer there, and as you say, embrace what we've got now. So no, I get it. Now, for those out there just that maybe have lived under a rock for the last 15 years, so Atlassian builds, I think you'd call them team collaboration and project management tools. Would you agree with that?
Yep,
so people may have heard of, I guess a common one might be Trello, but then there's some others that are probably a little bit more corporate or enterprise level sort of programs as well. So if you haven't actually looked at them, they're actually quite cool little tools that you can use, and quite powerful if you actually sink your teeth into them. So anyway, sorry for that little plug.
Well, actually, I wanted to know, like, for the average sort of person out there that's not corporate, not doing enterprise and so forth, Trello can be used for lots of things. Like, what other sort of resources is Atlassian bringing out?
So the most of the software product has really been aimed at the software developer market, right? And so it is sort of I would say probably not the most intuitive if you're a everyday mum and dad type user, and that's where products like Trello fit that beautifully.
Yes,
right. But the other thing I think people also miss is that Atlassian is, we do build software products, and that's our bread and butter, but there's a whole lot of work we do around practices and playbooks and so on like that. And I think that's something, that I would encourage everyone from, whether you're a financial planner through to a teacher to someone running a big multinational company, that you check out, because they're really useful tools and plays there about anything and everything to do with teams. Right? So whether it is understanding the health of your team, whether it is understanding a problem, it is how do you get onto the same page about a particular problem? And a lot of that is there. And there's some of the things that I think sometimes gets neglected. It's that thought leading, it's that sort of, it's the hacks, the plays and stuff that they invest a lot of time. And obviously the tools complement it, but that alone is an amazing standalone resource that I think anybody out there can get a lot of value out of.
Absolutely.
So, John, tell us a little bit about, if we go backwards, growing up in New Zealand, yes, so family life. So I'm wanting to get out of you or tease out of you now your journey with finances. All right. So growing up, what was that like? Did you have parents that actively talked about money? Was it a bit of a taboo subject? What are some things that you sort of remember from your childhood around finances that possibly have helped shape you a little bit today?
So I spent my first 7 years in Sri Lanka. So I don't know if you know, but we left there as refugees, and New Zealand took us in. And so I sort of I had sort of two phases in terms of my journey with money, right? Our life in Sri Lanka was very comfortable, right? We had a toilet inside the house. Like that's massive. We had colored TV. We had 2 cars, right? Like and so I was sort of exposed to a lot of wealth in that, and my dad was very savvy when it came to sort of generating wealth and making money and so on. I bet he was a lawyer, and so he knew how to do all that. But then, the Civil War hits, and we're sort of upended and moved to New Zealand. And for him and for my parents, it was really hard to start over again. So the next phase of my money of our journey is sort of when we were sort of young kids through to teenagers type thing, was living in an environment where it was very tight. It was sort of pay to pay and so on like that. My dad experienced redundancy that he never really fully recovered from financially. It was the best thing that happened to him from a career perspective. It really shifted his focus away from pursuing a career to sort of more he pursued a career in faith and so on like that, which really was very fulfilling for him. But from financially, it probably wasn't the ideal sort of environment to grow up in. But that said, I think a lot of sort of what myself, my sisters, we all sort of take on board now is that in that sort of time of need or that lack, we became really self-sufficient. So a lot of us, the three of us, we had jobs from sort of when we were 10, right? We were paper running it. I was a paper run. I was a cook at KFC. Right, no, sorry, it's a chef at KFC, right? I worked the dishes at an aged care facility for 4 years, data entry, gardening, yard, whatever it took to earn some extra coin to feel the lifestyle that I guess I wanted to have as a teenager and at university and so on like that. And it was the same thing with my sisters as well. My parents provided the bare minimum, provided a roof under our roof for us, food on the table, access to education, and the most amazing love that you could find. But outside that, we had to really go and work for it and fend for ourselves. And I do not regret that one bit, because it really taught me the value of money. And I love to see that replicated in my kids as well. It's sort of an aspiration.
Yeah. Okay. And do you think that somehow, was that early life stages and changes? Is that what sort of led you to have a passion in the philanthropic world, or where did that sort of come from?
Yeah. When my parents were always big on giving back, right? And they did a lot of their giving back through their church and through their faith. And so that seed was planted in us, I think, from day one, right? And so when I realized that, hey, you could actually make a career out of this, right? And you can actually do good, you can impact thousands and thousands, millions of lives, and yet actually make a living out of this and actually build a career out of this. I think it all sort of stemmed from those sorts of seeds that happened. But I don't think this sort of career, anybody wakes up going, I'm going to be a social impact manager or work in CSR. People in this space stumble into it generally. And the people that generally do well have usually come from other careers, and because they've brought in really useful transferable skills.
Yep.
Right? I hire a lot for roles, and sometimes the worst candidates are those ones that have gone and studied this at university up to like a master's and a PhD level type thing, but don't have any real world experience in it. And so the candidates that are like top notch are those ones that have actually got work experience in the space, sort of lived it, done the grind, such.
So what you're telling me is you can't get into your role unless you're a chef at KFC, is that right?
Yeah, you've got to have done a paper run, a chef, and done the dishes.
There's specifically a chef at either KFC or McDonald's, not at some fancy restaurant. That won't work.
No, KFC. It's got to be KFC.
It is interesting, though, in the sense that I know that there's been a couple of aha moments, call it, as I've grown up, where you sort of, you don't realise how your earlier years have shaped you in terms of what's important, what's not. And all of a sudden you can wake up, and I'm guessing you've probably had these moments as well, where you sort of go, gosh, I'm getting a bit passionate about this at the moment for whatever reason. But then you think back and you go, oh, wait a second, there's so much in my background that actually gives me reason to be passionate in this area. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can speak to an example that, just came to me at the top of my head. And for me, that area that I struggled with was high school. I hated it. Like, it just wasn't geared for my way of learning and the way I was wired. So I struggled for it. I was there because I had great mates, and we would fix up cars after school and play sport, and that's what made it for me. But so fast forward, that there was that frustration. Fast forward into my work at Qantas and at Atlassian, we were doing a lot of work with the young people, and we were seeing a lot of people, especially in the sort of the eastern corridor of Sydney, young people who just weren't engaging with the workforce and engaging with their studies. And that led over a period of about 18 months for me and somebody else to set up a organization called Young Change Agents. So Young Change Agents basically provides social entrepreneurship training for young people, right? And it gets them thinking slightly differently to the way our current education system is geared. So it adopts a very design thinking sort of methodology, but at the center of it is about, hey, what is the social problem that we need to solve in our community? And so, you put it in a school context. It could be if you're in it could be environment. It could be, you go into a lot of female schools. It's female safety, it's rape, and things like that. How can we solve that issue? But how can we solve that issue by building a sustainable business around it? And so we created this, I guess it's a charity now that provides this sort of entrepreneurial training for young people in around Australia. And I think we're year 7 into it now, and it's still going pretty strong. Got contracts with a whole bunch of government schools and so on like that. But that came out of this frustration for me of not being taught properly at school and not being taught, the importance of sort of giving back and making a difference. That was that painful moment for me, I guess.
Yeah, okay, right. So I guess touching on the going back to the childhood again, so did your parents talk about money? Like, where did this drive come from? Do you think it was just the Sri Lankan thing, or did your parents still have this, call it, almost dinner lessons around, how to take these steps, or where do you think you got it from?
Hamish, I definitely don't think it came from my parents. It might have come subconsciously through my dad. I know my dad was quite entrepreneurial in his Sri Lanka days, right? But my memory of it growing up sort of in New Zealand was just the constant fear of not having enough money, and my dad working a few jobs here, like 2-3 jobs sort of to make ends meet and so on like that. So it didn't come from there, Hamish. I think for me, it really just came from like self-educating myself and being exposed to people, right? So I see it growing up in little old New Zealand in the 80s and 90s. You had this amount of knowledge around education, around finance, and then you move to Australia, a slightly bigger market, and you see how finance is done and how wealth generation is done. And so that was another learning opportunity. And now working for a company that is, got footprints in the US and Europe and sort of the bigger markets, you really get to see how some of these ultra net worth people are doing, are looking and having their attitudes towards wealth, right? So I think for me, it's just that every season of my life has given me new insights into what I need to do for that. And I think I've just also read pretty broadly, right? There was a season where I was very interested in property, and so I just consumed as much as I can and learned as much as I can and made as many mistakes as I can. And that was a big teacher for me, like making really big mistakes and learning from things like that.
So if we take those seasons and bring them all together, and someone comes up to you, John, or a young person, part of your program, whatever else, and says, hey, I'm really trying to get ahead financially in life. What are the things that you would say to them? What are the tips that you would say to them from the point of view, okay, this is what you need to do?
Yeah, get a great financial planner like Hamish, number one. No, it is important though. I think it is important that you surround yourself with people that are going to speak into you in a bunch of areas. And I didn't have that for a while, right? And I do now. I have Hamish, you're one of them, and I have other people that feed input into me, right? So I think it's really important that you surround yourself with people that are going to feed wisdom, especially around financial knowledge into you. And it's not just people, right? There's resources out there. I learned so much from YouTube, right? And so it's just keeping that open. So I'd say the first thing is really like grow your financial literacy. Like it's up to you at the end of the day. The stuff's not going to be taught at university, and I wasn't fortunate enough to have that taught in my childhood. So you have to really self-educate yourself. I'd say the next thing is that I'd say to this young person, know what you want to get out of with money, right? Know some of the big big things that you think you want to achieve with the money, and be firm on that, but also be flexible. I know, Hamish, in our relationship, you've seen my priorities change, shop change, and things like that. But I've generally had an idea for that season or for that short to medium term, what we wanted that money to do. And so that sort of then helps you educate yourself and put things in place. The other thing I'd say is, a real practical thing is get an investment property under your belt. Whether it is just something, cheap in an apartment, whether it's in, whatever you can afford, just get it in there. Do the hard yards to get it in. And you don't have to live in it. It doesn't have to be in the flashy suburb, but get something in there. And it's not just about the investment, but it's what you're going to learn in doing that investment, right? It's the things like, getting a loan and servicing a loan and, keeping tenants happy and all that sort of stuff. It's that lesson that you learn. And then the final thing I think I would really encourage young people, and this is probably really important to me, is, build your charity into it, build your philanthropy into it. Like, the money you make is obviously there for you to enjoy and provide an environment for you and your family and your loved ones, but it's also there to help others in need. And so bake it in from day one. This is one thing I absolutely forgot, and remiss, and Dad, if you're listening to this, I'm so sorry. But the number one lesson they taught me when I got my first paper run was take 10% out of it and give it away to charity. And for us at that point was our church, right? So we started doing that. But that practice, 40 years or 30 years down the line, is still there with us, right? And we do it. And so that baking it into from day one, I think it's really, really important.
I think it's a hard thing, we talked about, with the 1% movement, trying to get companies to understand that, but it's actually a hard thing for people to understand as well, that, if you can have that part of you, that side of you that's actually, giving something, whatever it is, it changes your perspective on life. It changes the way in which you can relate to other people. It actually changes quite a few things in the way in which you're focused on what you're doing.
Yep. And if you make that the first thing you sort of take out, right? There's something about pulling it out. Like, you get your paycheck, and if that's the first decision you make to pull it out, it almost feels like you're prioritizing others and you're prioritizing your community more than yourself, right? And there's something special in that, rather than, okay, this is what I've got left over, I'll give a percentage of that sort of thing. Just, hey, prioritize it first, your community, your country, the people in need. It's just something there.
And I think, I know for me that's been an important part of my journey, but I know that when we've interviewed other people, successful people, and even when you read books and read autobiographies, giving actually becomes a focus, and it's quite important to them. So it is hard for people to actually go, hang on a second, it's hard to explain that part of being successful is actually having that 1%, 5%, whatever it is that you're giving away, that actually does create a successful, moving forward. It creates a pathway where you can actually go forward. And it's hard to really explain that to people until they actually do it. Would you agree?
I absolutely. I think two things there that you've really prompted me to think about was, one, I think too many people wait till they're older and they've made sufficient amount of money before they start giving it away, right? And you've lost a whole period of your life in which you could have been making that impact. The second thing is, I think giving away, giving back is not just about money. It's about your time and your skill set as well, right? So, if everybody, took some time out and acted on their skills, right? Whether you're a financial planner, Stephen, I don't know much about you, but I think you're a fantastic sort of MC host, right? If you took those skills and you sort of used that to give back to somebody in need, right? I think that it's sometimes way more valuable than the money that you can drop into a bank account or something like that. So don't discount the value of volunteering and giving back, especially with your skill set.
So I will say Jono, that I did try this logic that you've got here with the ATO, all right? And unfortunately, they didn't quite see it the same way. They wanted just money. That's all they wanted, right? So they were happy for me to keep my time.
So when did you view the ATO as a charity?
Well, no, I just sort of, I took this logic of, well, wait a second, I'm giving you first, aren't I? I'm giving you money first, right? So, but I need to talk to you about whether I can give time or money. Like, is this something that, I can barter with? But no, it didn't really work.
No,
right, so.
They just want their one track.
Yeah, I think actually bringing up that whole time and skills is important, because people often do get focused on money. And there are some people out there, well, not just some, there's a lot of people out there where money is very tight. It's very tight. But it's actually about going, well, hang on, what can I give to my community? What can I give to those around me in relation to that? Which is great to focus on. So I wanted to recap on what you were saying in regards to that question around finances and offering advice. So you're sort of saying for you it was having mentors around you, whether they're professional mentors or not. Secondly, it was around getting into the market, whether it's getting into property or getting into something else, but starting that, because it's actually the starting of it and the doing of it that actually teaches you the lessons that you need to learn. And I think one of the things that we've found when we've been talking to people and actually looking at research and so forth is that older people tend to be more financially literate. And it's not because they did a course or they had a better schooling. It's because they've done that. They bought their first car, they bought their first home, they bought their investment property, they got some managed funds together at some point, or shares. They've done these things, and so therefore they have that knowledge. And I think that's actually really important, is to say, what's that old saying, what's better than doing it today, doing it tomorrow. It's like getting into, if you're not doing it now, like just actually start something and get going, even if it's a small amount. But other than those, is there anything else you'd sort of suggest to someone that for you has been something that's really propelled you forward in your own personal finances?
Yeah, I made a comment earlier about getting that investment property under your belt, right? And for me, when I was growing up, that was pretty much that, and shares were the only really vehicle out there to do it. But I also think where possible, right? Look at starting a business, right, and failing at it dismally, right? Before we started Young Change Agents and had a lot of success in that, and now 7 years later, 8 years later, it's still going. I had 3 businesses that folded and failed dismally. But man, the lessons I learned from those were so invaluable that, each of those failures sort of was a stepping stone to the success that I had afterwards with this nonprofit, this business sort of thing. The biggest failure was that it actually went from a business to a nonprofit, right? And I don't know if that's a failure, but it was, but it was those. Yeah. It was actually easier for us to get funding when you were a charity than you were a going concern business. But that's another story. So yeah, just to say, look, I think there's some value in starting a business, right, or getting started in that way. And the other thing as well is that outside of shares, there are ETFs are really good sort of investment now for people who don't want to do a lot of the hard yards and research and so on like that, who just want a vehicle that tracks the market. What did Warren Buffett say? His advice to anybody was just go and buy index funds, right? And so easy. Your education level probably doesn't have to be overly high, but you're getting your foot in and so on.
Look, for those of our listeners that don't understand what ETFs are and that sort of thing, do you want to explain that?
No, I think you guys can do a better job. But essentially, my understanding is that it is a cross section. It's a percentage of shares in an index of a whole bunch of different markets, right? And so you're not investing in one share class; you're investing in a collection of shares, but very, very small amounts. So if you're investing in, say, the ASX 200, it's the top 200 companies, but very small percentages of those 200, and the market or a computerized algorithm sort of determines what organizations are going in and out of that. And sort of the benefit there is that because it's all managed electronically, the fees and stuff like that tend to be a lot lower. The barrier to get into this is a lot easier and cheaper.
Yeah, look, the only thing I'll probably sort of qualify over that is just for listeners, obviously this is general advice, but I guess the thing is as well is that, Johnny, you're right, that there's lots of vehicles out there that just take some of that risk away by just spreading the money around into a variety of purposes. So for us, I think the main thing to take into consideration though is to start small. Don't sort of jump in with the house type thing. So because you need to be prepared to just learn as you go. All right. So, but what I agree totally with you is that, just to get in and get your hands dirty a little bit and understand that you might not get it right the first time, but the lessons that come out of it are so important. Any type of investment needs a time frame. So you need to make sure that you're mentally prepared to leave this money in place for the time frame that's desired. And that does get a little bit tricky at sometimes to get right. But essentially if you start small, then, at least the losses are small. You put in $1,000, you lose 10%, you've lost $100. All right. So, and it is important to sort of start small so you sort of get to learn how these things behave. Anyway, sorry for the financial planning sort of spin there, but...
No, but I think that's important. Like we've talked about that before, Hamish, that whole idea of and it was really good that you brought that up, Jono, the idea of not just getting focused on, for instance, property. I'm an investment property advisor. That's my thing. That's my area, But even I would say to my clients, you need to be talking to other people other than myself to actually have those different modes, those different tools in your belt. And as you said, Hamish, understand that, look, a good example is if you're going to go into property, you probably want to have a 10-year commitment. If you want to go into managed funds or shares or ETFs, there's another level of commitment there, probably a lot less than 10 years. So you've got to work out, for me at this time, with this amount of money that I have, what is that commitment level? And I think, as you said also, Hamish, what commitment level can you do from the point of your finances? What are you prepared to lose as you move forward? And starting small, being balanced and being careful is by far the best way to go.
So I know I'm going to backtrack a little bit, but I think Jono made a really important point before around this giving of time versus money as well. And I guess, the thing that I've just been sitting on for the last 5 to 10 minutes is just going, one of the epidemics or one of the big things that are out there at the moment that is just such a problem in society is loneliness. And we can sort of say that COVID sort of has impacted this and the work from home and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, just being able to pick up the phone to somebody in your community or network and say hello and ask them how they're going. They're things that cost you nothing these days, but they're priceless, aren't they? So, mate, can I just ask a question? So I noticed on your LinkedIn, I did a bit of, stalking you in the background before we did this.
He stalks everyone, John. Don't worry. Don't take it personally.
The problem is everyone knows I'm coming because I'm on the free version. So, but I notice you've got a passion. There seems to be this theme for passion for people coaching and I guess people management in there, or a desire to mentor. So I've got sort of 2 questions in there. So help us understand a little bit more about why that's important to you and where that sort of come from, and also just what your own journey with mentorship and possibly you touched on this a little bit earlier before, but how you've gone out to look for people in the past that you might find that are going to help you on your journey.
Yeah, thanks for stalking my... I actually saw you looking at my profile, and so I know you're looking at it. Get the paid version, mate, if you're going to be stalking people. But how it really came about was, look, I never had anybody hold my hand and walk me through careers advice, right? Like there's a famous saying that if you're Indian, subcontinent, Sri Lankan, whatever, Asian, right? There's 3 type of careers out there. You're either a doctor, lawyer, or a failure, right? and so if you're not pursuing those sorts of careers, no one really cares type thing. And so I never really had anybody sort of hold my hand and sort of advise me, guide me, disciple me through my career. And so part of my desire to get back in to move into coaching and do a lot of coaching was really help people navigate their careers and find fulfillment in what they do. And the second thing was that I had some really shocking managers in my career, right? Very self-focused, corporate ladder climbing careers that would do anything to kind of get to the top. And I vowed that I would never want to be like that with the people I lead and the people I manage. And so for me, and then I had a really exceptional boss who really rather than manage me, coached me, and I loved the way he did it, right? And so for me, that was that example of, hey, this is how I want to be led. This is how and I want to lead. So I really got into studying. I got into studying coaching, and it's just something that I use quite extensively in my leadership and how I manage my team. But it's also what I do when I coach people, like either in their careers or whatever. Essentially, for me, the biggest difference is. When you're managing someone, you're essentially telling them what to do, right? Here's the goal, go and do it this way, and it's that way. But when you're working with really high-performing people, that's not what you want to do. It's very disempowering. So what coaching does is that it essentially puts them as the expert in whatever field it is, right? And this is different where mentoring is very much about you're the expert. In coaching, you are the person that is being coached is the expert, right? And then what your job is to tease out from them what the solution is, or what I'll help unblock them in terms of what they where they're trying to go. Right. And this is where coaching works across whole different types of fields. This is where you have, business coaches mentoring or coaching sports players, or you have sports players coaching, ASX listed CEOs and stuff like that, because the fundamental part is that the person who's being coached is the expert. And your job is just to bring the best out of them. And then you do that by asking them challenging questions. And then by them coming up with those solutions and answers, they are then taking responsibility as well for it. You all know when you tell someone to do it, they'll do it, but they won't necessarily take responsibility. But when they've come up with the solution themselves and they've sort of come on board, very little motivation is needed. That's generally what I'm finding.
And I think, you look at top tier sports players, they all have coaches. It's not like their coach says, I'm a better tennis player than you. There's no way the coach would assume that. I mean, this is one of the number one, tennis players in the world, but they still need a coach to try and help them bring the best out in them.
Yep. Yeah, I was watching the Netflix series on Michael Jordan, right? If you haven't seen it, the Chicago Bulls story. And I was thinking, what would the coach of Michael Jordan, when Michael was at the peak of his career, tell him, right? Like, technically, you couldn't really teach him anything more than what he was, right? What he knew. He was the absolute at his pinnacle technically. But I think what he did was that he unblocked a lot of challenges that Michael faced, whether that was, psychological problems, whether it was, getting him a lot more goal focused and things like that. And so I think that's what I love about coaching, and especially coaching really high performance people. They know it all, and they've got it all. They've got all the tools and the kit sort of thing. It's being able to sort of help them and channel them get where they need. I think, Hamish, you're a fantastic financial coach, right? I mean, planner as well. But from a coaching perspective, I just look at how you've guided me and Priya over, the last nearly 15 years, I think, right? 15 years. A lot of it has been, you don't really tell us what to do. Sometimes I'm like, just tell us what you need to do, Hamish. But most of the time, right, you've asked us very poignant questions, right? That's got us thinking. Right. And it's in that thinking that, we've sort of come up with sort of solutions or come up with things that, then you've gone and you've validated it with sort of the law and whether it can be done financially and things like that. And so I think coaches play a really, really important role of bringing out the best in people.
John, I told you I'd learned something today, and even though you've just given me praise, I think that was great what you just said. So thank you for that. So have you been able to be deliberate in looking for those people at times to coach you?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Recently I haven't, but yeah, my approach is if there's a gap that I know that I need work on, I will go and find somebody, and then that can help me unblock that space, right? And people come in and out of the seasons, right, to help unblock it. At the moment, I'm working with someone it's a very informal sort of relationship who's helping me unblock. I don't want to go too personal into it, but a specific area of my career that I need to sort of, I need to break, and I need to dispel, and need to sort of have some growth in that area. And he's come into my life, and he's challenging me, and it's really important that I'm challenged. But I know that is time boxed and shortened, and that will end. And then there'll be another problem. You're always going to have problems, right? And you'll need someone else who can help you unblock that area.
I think that's really important as well to say, as you said, then it's about different areas. So, you might have Sarah who is a mentor or a coach when it comes to finances, but, you wouldn't be talking to her in regards to, another area of your life. So it's about going, okay, this person is specifically good at this area, and I want them to coach me and to help me to understand and learn what I can from them in regards to this. But it's about not cross-pollinating as well, isn't it? So it's not saying this person's now an expert in every area, because they're going to fail. No one can be an expert in every area, and what's really important is recognizing what you want from that person. And I think what you said then was really important about saying this is for a specific time. This person who's mentoring you in an area for your career, it's only going to be for a specific period of time with that person, and that may or may not continue on. But that's important to actually recognise as well, I think, is saying, I'm getting this person to help me with this issue, and then there'll be someone else after that for another issue.
And knowing when it's time to end that relationship. Yeah. Right? I think that's important. Sometimes, coaching relationships can go on a little bit too long, and they have this diminishing value, and then it becomes a bit of a waste of time, not just for you, but for that other person as well. And so knowing when you've achieved sort of what you want to achieve and sort of terminating that is, I think, is equally as important as knowing when to get into a relationship.
And how often have you paid for coaching or mentoring compared to, getting it free from, someone who's working with you or that's older?
Yeah. I'm Sri Lankan, so it's free the better. But no, there have been times when I've paid for it. Yeah. And I think there are sometimes you get what you pay for, sort of thing, right? Like some services you just have to pay, and they're worth their weight in gold, sort of thing. But Atlassian, for example, has an informal network of coaches that we also use, specifically around certain areas, and they're free, and they've been equally as good. So I tried to go free where as possible. I tried to give out services that are free as well, but sometimes you have to pay, and I think sometimes coaches have got to make a living as well, right? So there's
that balance with time and money, isn't it? So I think it's interesting when you use the phrase of "I'm Sri Lankan," isn't it obvious type thing. So, and of course, so I've grown up believing it was the Scots that held the frugal sort of country, and then my wife was born in South Africa, and she said, "No, we've all got servants. We own the frugal phrase." It's funny how we've all sort of grown up with these stories. But anyway, very much a side note. So, mate, I guess the last question before we start to sort of sum up a little bit, but so financial literacy, we've touched on this a couple of times, and obviously through your journey with Atlassian, this has been something that you guys have been quite deliberate with. So I'm just keen to hear your thoughts on I guess why a lot of the research shows that financial literacy is slowly declining over time. Through your work or your own experiences, do you have any sort of thoughts on why you think that's happening? and possibly what we should be doing as parents or mentors or whatever on how to stop it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, I think yes and no, Hamish and Stephen. I definitely don't think it's taught at schools, right, to the way that it should be, right? And I think what needs to be taught is the practical side of things at school, the scrappy nature of personal finance. That is just not taught. And for me, I had to learn that by doing it my way, getting my own jobs and, investing in my way and surrounding myself. Would I have been better if it was taught at school, if I had that sort of platform? Yeah, absolutely. I think I would have been. But also I know that I'm a sort of a guy that needs to learn by doing. So that's just my thing. I think people who have a slightly advanced knowledge of financial literacy, and I don't think I'm one of them, but people who've done reasonably well have that responsibility to pass that knowledge on, right? And you have to start at home, right? And that's something that I want to do more of. But I also realize that sometimes I'm in a family where that is not viewed as important. So then it has to be taught in a way that it's role modeled, right? What do they say? It's so much of it, things are absorbed rather than taught. So I want my kids to see me and Priya with how we manage our finances and what we put value in and how we give away and stuff. And I want that sort of thing to be taken up by our kids and replicated. But I don't know how to scale it. I don't know how to take that and sort of amplify what I'm doing.
It's important to acknowledge though that you can't the journey of being a dish pig, all right, so as a teenager is priceless, all right. So
he was a chef.
He was a chef as well. So he actually got to have the knives thrown at him right in the kitchen, and then possibly throw the knives back when he was at KFC. But you can't teach that. You can't teach somebody, how the value of just getting in and sweating and just having to, absorb that water and just scrub your heart out for 3 or 4 hours. Like, you can't teach that, can you?
No. You work your guts off and you get your first paycheck and half of it's gone to taxes. Like, how do you could learn that in a textbook that, 19%, 20%, 30% is taken off at tax, but it doesn't sit. The reality doesn't happen until you get your first paycheck and you're expecting this much and what you're actually getting is that much, right? Like, that stuff has to be experienced. And I think if you experience that at a younger age, it's much better than, as you get older and so on like that. So,
it is valuable, and I'm just thinking about, we do some internships with Newcastle University up here, and there's been a couple of times where I've had to sit down, final year students and go, you need to wake up, you need to actually communicate and fight for your existence type thing. So, like, you can't just expect this stuff to be given to you on a plate. And they're things that, I would hope that those people that have heard that have really listened and gone, okay, all right, so I'm not God's gift to mankind or womankind or whatever it happens to be. So, So that experience is really important, which comes back to the property investment or, getting in and getting your hands dirty and doing, just not learning, isn't it? It's really that theme of you got to have a go, all right, which I think is valuable. So, Jono, in closing sort of things, a couple of more hopefully light-hearted questions to be able to finish off with. So if you could go back to your 18-year-old self and give yourself some advice, what's one or two things that you'd probably say to yourself? And
it's not just money advice, talking general career.
You can, absolutely.
Look, if I was speaking to my 18-year-old self, I would start by saying a few things. One, don't get hung up on this, you need to be a doctor, lawyer, or a failure. That's because I think that really got drummed into me culturally. Right? Our culture is big on that. So don't always be bound to what your culture puts on you, right? And at the end of the day, your grades aren't going to matter jack until after you get your first job, right? After that, no one looks at your HSC grade, whether you got an 8 or 99.9 or whatever. They look at whether you can do the job and experience and the attitude that you bring in. So none of that matters. Career-wise, I was thinking about this because I'm about to hit 10 years at Atlassian. The thing I'd tell myself is don't go and work for an established company, for a well-known brand or anything like that. Go do the startup thing, right? Because the startup thing gives you are almost a jack of all trades. You are doing everything, right? One day you're doing, the finance stuff. The next day you're the people person, you're the people manager, you're doing marketing goals, whatever. And the experience that gives you in such a short time is so much more valuable than you will learn in any graduate program, any first job, and so on like that. Because as soon as your first job is generally very targeted niche area, and this is by getting into that startup type of environment, you get a very sort of holistic exposure to a whole bunch of different careers, right? And I wish I had that, because I think that would have fast-tracked my appetite towards something much more than sort of how I started. But it's what happens when you grow up in Wellington or Canberra.
As you said, if you weren't in the government, you're the odd person out in the street.
Well, you're unemployed. That's right.
So, look, Jonathan, one of the things we ask all of our guests is, if you were going to write a book, what would the title be?
Oh, tough one. Let's see. Jeez, that's putting me on the spot there. I would say I'd love to have something around lawyer, doctor, or
I was thinking the same thing.
Something like that.
That's a great title, lawyer, doctor, or failure.
or even why failures are better than lawyers and doctors. Right?
That's it. I'd flip it to the positive. I'd need to get approval from who was it? Jay Shetty, who's the famous sort of philosopher, the guy that became a monk and then went on to sort of have this massive career as a speaker. But he coined it. But yeah, I would definitely say it in the positive, right? Why being a failure is better than being a doctor or a lawyer, and so on.
To all those doctors and lawyers out there, it's okay. We still value what you do.
Yeah.
Well, look, John, thank you so much for coming on today's podcast. We really appreciate it. We've really enjoyed listening to you and hearing your story and where you've come from and your advice to all of us. But thank you so much.
Yeah, very, very appreciated. Thanks, John.
Thanks, guys. Really love talking to you all.
No problems. Well, Help My Wealth is all about empowering your financial journey and to do it in a balanced and safe way. And today we've done that by talking to John. I hope this has been good for you and that you've enjoyed it and taken something out of it. Bye for now. We'll see you again next time.
Thanks, guys.
The information discussed on the Help My Wealth and the Money Rules podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only and is general in nature and is not advice. It is not intended as a substitute for professional finance, legal or tax advice. It is aimed to provide a general understanding of each topic and should not be relied upon to make an investment or financial decision. It is strongly suggested that you seek professional advice regarding your own individual circumstances before making a financial decision. Help My Wealth and the hosts of the Money Rules and Money Rules podcast are not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Before making any financial decisions, you should read the product disclosure statement and, if necessary, consult a licensed financial professional. Do not take financial advice from a podcast. In the spirit of reconciliation, Help My Wealth and the Money Rules and Money Rules podcast acknowledge traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to past, present and emerging elders. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today.